Plaza Hotel. Crystal chandeliers catching champagne light, 200 guests in tailored elegance, and a man who believed his world was finally bulletproof. Thomas Miller had spent 15 years building a fortress, $400,000 in savings, a career in blockchain security, and a future calculated down to the last decimal point. But while he stood at that altar saying vows to the woman he loved, someone 2 feet behind him was executing a different kind of promise. Not with rings, but with code. Not with love, but with precision. By the time the wedding cake was cut, Thomas's entire life savings had vanished. Not into some hacker's digital void across the world, but into the pocket of the man holding his wedding rings.
Hold on. If you want to know exactly how Mark pulled this off, if you want to see the moment Thomas discovered the truth, and if you want to learn how to make sure this never happens to you, then you need to hit that subscribe button right now and turn on all notifications. Because what I'm about to show you in the next few minutes isn't just a story, it's a blueprint of how the people closest to you can engineer your complete financial destruction without you noticing a single thing. This is surgical, this is calculated, and this is happening to someone right now while you're watching this video. So subscribe, smash that like button, drop a comment telling me if you've ever had someone you trusted betray you. You do not want to miss what happens next. Now, let's get back to Thomas.
Thomas Miller didn't believe in luck. He believed in systems. At 35, he'd built his life the way he built his code, layered, redundant, tested against every possible failure point. When other software engineers in Austin were buying trucks and taking ski trips, Thomas was running financial projections in spreadsheets with tabs labeled Retirement 2045 and Emergency Fund scenarios. His apartment in South Congress wasn't decorated with art, it was decorated with intention. Every purchase justified, every dollar assigned a purpose. $400,000. That number represented more than money. It was proof that discipline worked, that you could engineer your way out of uncertainty, that the universe rewarded those who planned. Every dollar in that account had a story. The double shifts during his consulting days at Deloitte, the side projects debugging blockchain protocols at 2 a.m., the birthday dinners he'd skipped to max out his Roth IRA before the annual deadline. This wasn't wealth, this was survival architecture. When Thomas met Sarah at a data privacy conference in Portland 3 years earlier, he didn't just fall in love, he calculated compatibility. She was a family therapist at OHSU, which meant stable income and health insurance. She valued emotional intelligence, which balanced his analytical bent. She wanted 2 kids, he wanted 2 kids. She thought his spreadsheets were adorable, which meant she understood him. They waited 3 years to get married specifically so their combined financial runway would be ironclad. No debt, no surprises, just 2 rational adults building something that couldn't collapse. The wedding itself was an extension of that philosophy. The Plaza Hotel in New York wasn't about showing off, it was about making a statement to himself that he'd arrived. That the kid from a middle-class Austin suburb who used to fix neighbors' computers for $20 had become someone who could afford crystal and imported flowers. But more importantly, Thomas had engineered the guest list with the same precision he applied to code audits. No distant relatives he barely knew, no colleagues he didn't trust, no +1s who were strangers, only the inner circle, only the people who'd been vetted, who'd earned their place through years of loyalty. And at the dead center of that circle was Mark Reynolds. Mark wasn't just a friend, he was the friend, the one who'd helped Thomas debug his first major security protocol, the one who'd talked him through his father's death, the one who'd been there when Thomas bought the engagement ring, offering advice about cut and clarity like he was family. Mark was brilliant in that specific way that made you feel smarter just by being near him. A finance degree from Boston University, a consultant's instinct for optimization, the guy who always knew the best rewards card, the best tax shelter, the best angle on any problem. When Thomas announced his engagement, Mark was the first person he asked to be his best man. There was never any question. But here's what Thomas didn't see, what his systems thinking couldn't account for. Mark was drowning. Not in self-pity or depression, but in debt. The kind of debt that doesn't appear on LinkedIn profiles, Las Vegas bookies, failed cryptocurrency arbitrage schemes, high-interest loans taken from people who don't send polite reminder emails. Mark had built an elaborate facade of success, the tailored suits, the consulting gigs with vague descriptions, the watch that cost more than most people's cars. But behind that facade was a man barely keeping his head above water, watching his best friend accumulate wealth with a systematic efficiency of a machine while he himself spiraled into financial oblivion. We want betrayal to announce itself. We want villains to look like villains. But the truth is that betrayal doesn't arrive in a single moment. It ferments over time, one resentful thought at a time, one desperate rationalization at a time. Mark didn't wake up on Thomas's wedding day and decide to destroy him. He'd been engineering this moment for 18 months, studying Thomas's patterns, mapping his vulnerabilities, waiting for the perfect convergence of opportunity and distraction. 3 weeks before the wedding, Mark showed up at Thomas's apartment in Austin with a story. His laptop had crashed during a critical client presentation. He needed to send urgent files. His phone wasn't cutting it. Could he please, just this once, use Thomas's home office setup? And Thomas, being the friend who believed in helping people, who believed that trust was the foundation of meaningful relationships, said yes without hesitation. He even left the room to make coffee, giving Mark privacy for his confidential work. What Thomas didn't see was the small USB device Mark slid into the back of the tower while his back was turned. A keylogger. You can buy them on Amazon for $30. They're marketed for parental monitoring, for employee oversight, for security purposes. But in the hands of someone who knows what they're looking for, they're skeleton keys. For 21 days, Mark didn't just have Thomas's passwords, he had the rhythm of his digital life. He watched which accounts Thomas checked and when. He watched him type security question answers, information Mark already knew from years of friendship, but now confirmed with digital precision. What was your first pet's name? Buster. What street did you grow up on? Meadowbrook Lane. The answers that were supposed to protect Thomas's assets were the very details that friendships are built on. Thomas had two-factor authentication. He had complex passwords that he rotated quarterly. He was a blockchain security specialist who'd built an entire company around protecting people from exactly this kind of attack. But here's the vulnerability that no firewall can patch: trust. When you trust someone completely, you don't watch them over your shoulder. You don't question their motives. You don't audit their actions. Trust, in the world of security, is the ultimate backdoor.
The morning of the wedding arrived with that particular kind of clarity that makes you feel like the universe is paying attention. The Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom had been transformed into something out of a dream. White roses cascading from every surface, soft lighting that made everyone look like they were glowing. 200 people Thomas and Sarah loved gathered in one place. Thomas stood in front of a mirror in his suite, adjusting his bow tie for the third time, and felt something he rarely allowed himself to feel: certainty. Not the calculated certainty of a good investment, but the deeper kind, the kind that says your life is finally aligned. Sarah looked at him from across the room, already in her dress, and smiled. "You ready?" she asked. He nodded, unable to articulate that ready didn't even begin to cover it. This was what 15 years of discipline had bought him. Not just the wedding, but the foundation to build everything that came after. What Thomas couldn't see, what no amount of preparation could have predicted, was that 2 floors down, Mark was standing in his own suite, staring at a burner phone, his hands shaking slightly as he reviewed the plan one final time. In his pocket was a duplicate SIM card programmed with Thomas's phone number. In his head was the complete sequence of what had to happen and when. The ceremony would start at 4 p.m., the cocktail hour would run until 6 p.m., That window, those 2 hours when Thomas would be maximally distracted, emotionally overwhelmed, and physically separated from any computer, was when everything had to happen. The ceremony itself was perfect. Thomas stood at the altar watching Sarah walk down the aisle, and in that moment, every spreadsheet, every calculation, every sacrificed vacation felt worth it.
Behind him, Mark held the rings, playing his role flawlessly, the loyal best man, slightly emotional, radiating support. When the officiant asked for the rings, Mark stepped forward and placed them in Thomas's palm with a smile that said, "I'm so happy for you, brother." And he was, in a way, happy that this moment was finally here, happy that the plan could finally execute. The vows were exchanged, the kiss happened, the room erupted in applause, and as Thomas and Sarah walked back down the aisle as husband and wife, Mark's phone, the burner in his inside jacket pocket, buzzed with the first confirmation. The keylogger data had successfully uploaded to the secure server he'd rented under a fake business name. Every credential was in place. During the cocktail hour, Mark found his moment. He approached Thomas at the bar where he was accepting congratulations from a cluster of college friends. Mark's face was flushed, his eyes slightly wet. "Man," he said, pulling Thomas into a hug, "I'm just so proud of you." And in that embrace, in that moment of manufactured emotion, Mark's right hand went to Thomas's jacket pocket where his phone rested. The movement was practiced, surgical. Slide the phone out just enough to pop the SIM tray, swap the card, return the phone. 3 seconds, maybe 4. Thomas felt nothing except the warmth of what he believed was genuine affection. Thomas still had his phone. It looked identical, it felt identical, but the number associated with that device, the number his bank had on file for security verifications, was now connected to the burner in Mark's pocket. It was elegant in its simplicity. Thomas would notice nothing wrong until he tried to make a call, and by then it would be far too late. At 5:47 p.m., while Thomas was taking photos with Sarah's family and Mark was standing alone near the bathroom corridor, Mark initiated the first transfer through Thomas's investment account portal. Small amount first, $5,000, to test the security protocols. It went through without a flag. At 6:03 p.m., while speeches were being given and Thomas was laughing at his father-in-law's terrible jokes, Mark initiated the second transfer, $50,000 from the primary savings account to a newly established brokerage account Mark had created the week before using Thomas's verified credentials. That one triggered the bank's security protocol, an automated call to the registered phone number for verbal confirmation. Mark stepped out onto the hotel's exterior terrace where the city noise would be cover and answered. "This is Thomas Miller," he said, modulating his voice just slightly. He'd been practicing for weeks. "Mr. Miller, we're calling to verify a large transfer request from your savings account. Can you confirm you're initiating a $50,000 transfer to Vanguard brokerage account ending in 7724? "Yes, that's correct. My wife and I are consolidating accounts for our house down payment. For security purposes, can you provide the last 4 digits of your social security number?" Mark rattled them off. He'd seen Thomas type them enough times through the keylogger. "Thank you, Mr. Miller. The transfer will be processed within 24 hours. Mark hung up, slipped the phone back into his pocket, and walked back inside. The entire call had taken 90 seconds. He grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, returned to his seat at the head table, and listened to the maid of honor give her speech about love and trust and forever. Over the next 3 hours, while dinner was shared and the first dance happened and Thomas and Sarah cut their cake, Mark executed 6 more transfers, each one carefully calibrated to stay below the threshold that would require manual bank review, from savings to brokerage, from brokerage to offshore account, from offshore to cryptocurrency mixer. By 11 p.m., when Thomas and Sarah were saying goodbye to the last guests and heading up to their honeymoon suite, $400,000 had been atomized across a dozen digital platforms, scattered like ash in a wind tunnel. Mark stayed until the end, hugged Thomas one final time, and told him he'd see him when they got back from their honeymoon. "I love you, man." And Thomas, exhausted and happy and completely unaware that his life had just been dismantled, said, "Love you too, brother."
The honeymoon suite at the Plaza is designed to make you feel like you've ascended to a different plane of existence. Floor-to-ceiling windows, Egyptian cotton sheets, a view of Central Park that looks like a painting. Sarah was still asleep when Thomas woke up at 7 a.m., his body unable to break the habit of early rising even on the morning after his wedding. He lay there for a moment, watching the sunrise paint the room gold, thinking about how they'd look back on this day someday with their kids, telling the story of how it all began. He reached for his phone out of habit. He wanted to see the photos people had posted, wanted to relive the night through other people's eyes. But his screen showed no service, just empty bars where the signal should be. Strange, but not alarming. The hotel's thick walls, maybe. He switched to Wi-Fi and opened his banking app, intending to just glance at the balance one more time, not out of anxiety, but out of satisfaction, wanting to see that number, that proof of everything he'd built. The app loaded. The balance appeared. $0. For a moment, Thomas's brain simply refused to process it. This had to be a glitch. Banks have glitches. Apps miscommunicate with servers. He refreshed. Still 0. He closed the app and reopened it. Still 0. The cold that started in his stomach spread outward until his hands were shaking. He checked his brokerage account. Also 0. His investment account. 0. His emergency fund. 0. Sarah stirred beside him. "Morning," she mumbled, her voice still thick with sleep. Thomas couldn't respond. His throat had closed. She sat up, saw his face, and went immediately alert. "What's wrong?" "It's gone," he whispered. "All of it. Everything's gone." The next 6 hours were a blur of police precincts and phone calls, and Sarah sitting in a plastic chair in the Austin Police Department's cybercrime unit, still in her silk robe because they'd caught the first flight home without even packing. The detective assigned to the case, a woman named Martinez, who looked about as enthusiastic as someone doing their taxes, listened to Thomas's explanation with barely concealed skepticism. "Mr. Miller, I have to ask, are you certain you didn't authorize these transfers yourself? Maybe after a few drinks at the reception?" Thomas wanted to scream. Instead, he pulled up his bank logs, showed her the timestamps, walked her through each transaction with the clinical precision of someone who understood exactly how the system had been exploited. "I'm a blockchain security specialist," he said, his voice tight. "This is what I do for a living. Someone installed a keylogger on my home computer 3 weeks ago. They swapped my SIM card during the wedding. They impersonated me to the bank." Martinez's expression shifted slightly. "And you think you know who?" Thomas didn't think. He knew. But proving it required more than intuition. While the police filed their reports and promised to investigate, Thomas went home and did what he should have done the moment he'd lent Mark his computer. He ran a full diagnostic. The keylogger was still there, hidden in the startup processes, faithfully recording every keystroke. He pulled the logs, 3 weeks of data, every password, every security answer, every account access. Then he did what he'd built his career around. He traced the money. The offshore brokerage account had transferred the funds to a cryptocurrency exchange. From there, they'd been sent through a mixer, a service designed to obscure the origin of digital currency. But mixers aren't perfect. They leave patterns, and Thomas had spent years learning to read those patterns. He followed the trail through 3 separate wallets until he found the endpoint, a Coinbase account that had been active for 18 months. That account had a transaction history. And buried in that history from 6 months ago was a payment to a luxury watch retailer in Manhattan. Thomas remembered that watch. He'd seen it on Mark's wrist at a dinner party last spring. Mark had claimed it was a gift from a grateful client. The confrontation didn't happen in a police station or a courthouse. It happened in a Starbucks on South Congress Avenue 3 days after the wedding. Thomas texted Mark a simple message. "Need to talk. Coffee?" Mark showed up looking concerned, carrying a laptop bag, playing the role of supportive friend to perfection. "Man, I heard what happened," he said, sliding into the booth across from Thomas. "This is insane. Have they caught anyone yet?" Thomas didn't say anything. He just turned his laptop around. On the screen was the complete transaction map, every transfer, every wallet, every step of the money's journey. And there, highlighted in yellow, was the watch purchase. Below that, a screenshot from Thomas's own wedding photos showing Mark wearing that exact watch. The color drained from Mark's face. He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Thomas, Don't." Thomas's voice was flat. "Don't insult me with a lie. I have the keylogger data. I have the voice recording from the bank. They sent it to me this morning. I've already given everything to the police." What happened next wasn't dramatic. There was no shouting, no physical confrontation. Mark just collapsed. Not physically, but spiritually. He started crying,
rambling about pressure and expectations and debts, about how everyone thought he was successful when he was actually drowning, about how he'd planned to pay it back once his consulting business turned around, about how Thomas had always been the one who succeeded, who had everything figured out, while he was just pretending to be Mark. Thomas listened to all of it with the emotional distance of someone watching a stranger confess. When Mark finally stopped talking, Thomas asked the only question that mattered. "Where's the money?" Mark's silence was the answer. Gone, dissolved into debts that had accumulated over years. The offshore accounts were empty shells. The cryptocurrency had been cashed out and spent. There was nothing to recover. Mark Reynolds is currently serving 7 years in federal prison for wire fraud and grand larceny. The trial took 8 months. The evidence was overwhelming. The keylogger, the SIM swap, the voice recording, the blockchain trail. The judge called it a betrayal of the highest order and a calculated exploitation of intimate trust. Thomas got his justice, but justice doesn't refund savings accounts. He and Sarah didn't buy the house they'd planned. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in East Austin and started over from zero. Sarah went back to work earlier than they'd planned. Thomas took on extra consulting projects, rebuilding what Mark had taken, one invoice at a time. The wedding photos sit in a box in their closet. They couldn't bring themselves to frame them. But here's what Thomas told me when I interviewed him for this story, something that changed the way I think about security forever. "I spent 15 years protecting my money from hackers I'd never met. I built firewalls and encryption and multi-factor authentication. I thought danger came from the outside. But the person who destroyed me wasn't some cybercriminal in a basement halfway around the world. He was standing 2 feet behind me, holding my wedding rings." Trust is supposed to be the foundation of human connection. But in the digital age, trust is also the most exploitable vulnerability we possess. Thomas's mistake wasn't being too trusting. It was believing that systems could replace judgment, that technology could secure what only wisdom can protect. The hardest lesson isn't that betrayal exists, it's that it can come from the people you die for, that the inner circle you spend years building can contain rot you never see, that love and loyalty aren't guarantees, just risk assessments you're running every day without knowing it. Your best man might be your greatest threat, and you won't know until the morning after, when you check your balance and see nothing but zeros staring back.
If this story made you look at your own inner circle differently, if it made you realize that trust without verification is just wishful thinking, then do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Hit that like button so this story reaches more people who need to hear it, and drop a comment telling me who in your life has unrestricted access to your trust. I'll see you in the next one. Stay sharp.